At fide.email, you don't need to compromise faith to participate in the modern world. Instead of pushing ads and invasive practices that conflict with Catholic values, we built Fide to reclaim technology for Christendom. When you use fide.email, you declare your commitment to technology that defends Christian tradition. Join fide.email today and use technology to advance Christendom.
In America and across the West, there's a battle that causes heated debate whether or not to receive the Eucharist in the hand or not. Defenders of the practice say you could find a church father who endorsed it, Tertullian. When you receive, have your hand put your hand meekly in the form of a cup forward and receive however he phrases it. What people won't tell you is that Tertullian was actually contradicted by actual church fathers. Tertullian was never canonized, by the way, not to my knowledge. It was a practice that came about first in Northern Europe and then in the United States through disobedience after Vatican II. Certain bishops started promoting it in their countries and their dioceses. Rome tried to intervene repeatedly, and repeatedly those bishops ignored it and started putting the practice in, and after a while, it just couldn't be stopped. Although most interestingly and most curiously, communion in the hand in Rome was blocked by Pope Francis. Well, it was blocked until Pope Francis. And at some point during his papacy, he started allowing it in the Vatican. But reportedly now, if you've been to Mass in Rome since Leo XIV, but since the end of the interregnum, let me know if communion in the hand, if you've seen communion in the hand allowed again. I don't think it has been. In fact, I think I've seen footage of Americans being denied communion under the new pontificate because they demanded it in the hand. It's an ahistorical practice for Catholics. And there's a whole lot of theology behind it, but it's a bone of contention. A serious one between traditionally minded Catholics, that is your traditionalists and you're just very conservative, ordinary form Mass goers, and everyone else. And one of the debates is, when you attend the new Mass, can you receive the Mass, can you receive the Eucharist kneeling and on your tongue? The Code of Canon Law says you can. It is your right to receive it on the tongue. A lot of bishops ignore that and try to stop it at all costs. We have a story of this happening right here in the United States. For those watching, my fellow countrymen, we go to LifeSite News with this unfortunate headline. Kentucky Archbishop issues new guidelines discouraging faithful from kneeling for Holy Communion. The Archbishop of Louisville released a document stating that clergy must instruct parishioners standing is normative for receiving the Eucharist based on the USCCB's designation. Now, calling that the normative way of receiving the Eucharist is purposeful. It's a purposeful use and twisting of the language. The reason is very, very simple. If it is viewed as normative to receive it in your hand and standing, then it is considered abnormal, a threat to communion, dare I say schismatic. To receive it the same way every Catholic in the Latin West and very similar to the way Catholics in the East receive it and have received it, going back to antiquity. In the East, they might receive it standing, but it's distributed in various forms on the tongue by the priest, not by the layperson. In the Latin West, it's always been distributed on the tongue as far as we can tell. Again, communion in the hand is a historical innovation. And if you want to know the reason so many of us object to the practice, it's simple. It destroys belief in the real presence. That was explicitly why some of the so-called reformers in the Protestant Revolution against Christ pushed for communion in the hand, to destroy belief in the real presence, because they didn't believe it was in the real presence. Some of them didn't. Some did. Some of the so-called reformers did not. And they wanted to destroy that belief. They wanted to bring everyone in line with this symbolic real presence that they believed, not the actual presence of our Lord in the material components of the sacrament. And it's been catastrophic what has happened to belief in the real presence since the innovators got their way. We now know by unequivocally in the data that only 30% of regular Mass goers believe in the real presence. Regular Mass goers, which is a tiny amount of people to begin with. Here are the details from the Archbishop of Kentucky, of Louisville. Quote, Archbishop Shelton Faber of Archdiocese of Louisville, Kentucky, issued a document on the norms for receiving the Eucharist last week that notably discouraged communicants from kneeling as they receive the Blessed Sacrament. The May 14th document entitled Norms for Posture in the Communion Rite emphasized that while the faithful cannot be denied Holy Communion if they choose to kneel, diocesan clergy will be required to instruct parishioners no later than June 22nd that standing is the normative posture for receiving the sacrament in the U.S. These guidelines are similar to other statements bishops have made that discourage kneeling while receiving the Eucharist. Standing is the norm for the reception of Holy Communion, Archbishop Faber wrote, citing the designation of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops in 2002. While communicants may not be denied Holy Communion because they kneel, catechesis of the faithful, such as sacramental preparation, should instruct that standing is the normative posture for reception of Holy Communion, he added. Deacons, servers, and other liturgical ministers are to observe the normative posture for standing to receive Holy Communion to appropriately model this norm for the faithful. The tradition of the Catholic Church, unbroken until after the Second Vatican Council, is that the lay faithful receive the Blessed Sacrament, administered by the priest, his hands having been consecrated for the handling of the sacred Eucharist on the tongue while kneeling. The Code of Canon Law, which binds all bishops and priests in the Roman Rite, legislates the following, quote, sacred ministers cannot deny the sacraments to those who seek them at appropriate times, are properly disposed, and are not prohibited by law from receiving them. Any baptized person not prohibited by law can and must be admitted to Holy Communion. End quote. Then it goes on to give you what other bishops have said on the matter. Now, they mention that you cannot be denied it for a reason. Most of you watching this will be aware that there has been a very real attempt by priests and some bishops to outright ban the practice altogether. They use the 2020 affliction as their excuse, but I received an email last week from somebody who tried to receive communion kneeling and on the tongue in the way that the Code of Canon Law absolutely allows them to, and they were completely denied. Had the Eucharist shoved into their hand. It's a violation of their rights as a Catholic. To say nothing about, generally speaking, how we were taught as Catholics for the last 2,000 years is the proper way to receive the Eucharist until basically last week. The real presence is not believed in by most Catholics anymore. Overwhelming majority. And it is such a core dogma of the faith that Jesus Christ is truly present, body, blood, soul, and divinity in the most blessed sacrament of the altar. Can you be a Catholic if you don't believe in that? Strictly speaking, no. This is why the bishops recognized this problem, and they spent millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars last year on a Eucharistic revival that had pilgrimages and exposition of the Blessed Sacrament, a lot of really good things. It also had like a football stadium kind of event at the end, which was kind of weird because the most personal relationship you can possibly have with Jesus Christ is in your relationship with that most blessed sacrament of the altar. It gets no more personal than that. In adoration, of course, valid reception, and all the rest of it. Which is why they chose the most impersonal way of doing it. Completely shocks the conscience when you think about it logically for half a second. And they wonder why people don't believe anymore. It's because the sacred species is handled with irreverence. That's why if you want to ever really feel convicted about how reverently you treat the Eucharist, think or go observe a Eastern Rite liturgy sometime with the absolute reverence that some of those priests have. Or to say nothing of a traditional Latin Mass. I'm not denigrating the TLM by any stretch. But there is, at least in the East, has been more preservation of that sense, that Catholic sense of what it is that we are proclaiming and the reality of what it is we proclaim. What we say we believe and what it is we actually believe. You'll see it in their liturgies, definitely more than you'll see it in the West these days. If you want to do anything to change the course the church is on, begin with how seriously you take the Eucharist. And you can do that by going to confession this weekend, if you haven't in a while. The crisis in the church is a crisis of a lack of belief and of man thinking he can put his own spin and own vision of what the church should be onto the church. It takes a lot of forms, and one of them is destroying belief in the real presence and our relationship to our Lord in the most blessed sacrament of the altar. A real Eucharistic revival will begin by making the Mass more reverent and making and enforcing old rules on how to receive the Eucharist. And that will require a lot of Catholics being willing to put aside their personal pride and discomfort and receiving it in the way that Catholics always did. Now, Cardinal Sarah, many of yours favorite cardinal for being the next pope, described the practice of receiving the Eucharist in the hand in unequivocal terms. He called it like a diabolical attack on the church. This is why we wonder how the Holy Father will react, if he'll react at all. Most serious observers in the hierarchy, theologians will agree that part of the reverence is actually receiving the Eucharist in the same way our ancestors did. And it's something we should think about. All right, folks, I'm curious what you have to say about this. Am says, during the Pope's inauguration, I saw about 20% of people receiving the Eucharist in the hand. So they do allow it still in Rome, I guess. They had about 150 North American seminarians as Eucharistic ministers. There is no need to have your extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion. It's in the name, extraordinary. Canonically, that's supposed to be a practice only done under extraordinary circumstances. And that doesn't mean communion, that might take an extra 5 minutes if just the priest and his permanent deacon do it themselves. Communion on the tongue kneeling at an altar rail is objectively faster than reception of the Eucharist in both kinds by the hand. It just is. Anybody who's gone through both will tell you that. Anybody who's been a minister or any like deacon or anybody or priest who get to speak honestly about this will tell you that the same is true as well. So it's not a matter of speed either. All right, folks, I'm curious what you think about this. In the comments, please like and subscribe if you haven't. It certainly helps. Share this on social media if that helps too. Please pray for everybody who spoke about today in any negative way. We're not here to rally you up against any of them. Please pray for the archbishops and the cardinals we spoke about today. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.